This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Okay, welcome everyone. Good Erev Shabbos Rabosai. As we prepare for Shabbos Chazoin, for Parshas Devarim, and for Tisha B'Av, the Gemara tells us in Masechta Pesachim, and continuing on our theme that we discussed Wednesday evening about the mitzvah of Kiddush Hashem. The Gemara tells us in Masechta Pesachim that those who give up their lives al Kiddush Hashem, a special makom in Gan Eden is reserved for them in a way that nobody could approach. The Gemara says, "Pesachim on Daf Nun Amud Beis, v'shamati shahayu oimrim." I heard that they said upstairs, "Haruge Malchus," those who were murdered by the government, "Ein Adam Yachal Lamoid b'mechitzasan," no one could stand in their vicinity. In other words, the light, the aura, the sanctity that they achieve in Olam Haba is unapproachable. So Gemara wants to know, who are we talking about? Uman ninhu. Who are you talking about? Ilim Rabbi Kiva v'chaveirav. If it refers to Rabbi Kiva and his associates, Misham Harugi Malchus v'sulai, only because of how they were killed, even had Rabbi Kiva died a natural death, certainly it would be Ein Adam Yachal Lamoid b'mechitzasan. And the Gemara says, Ela Harugi Lod. It's referring to other people who died al Kiddush Hashem. But in any event, the Gemara is telling us that those who are Mekadeshim Shamayim with the ultimate sacrifice, they reach a level that Ein Adam Yachal Lamoid b'mechitzasan. To the extent that the Gemara in Sanhedrin is talking about the property and the animals of an Ir Hanidachas, and the Gemara says that you cannot be makriv the animals of people who perished in an Ir Hanidachas. And the Gemara wants to know why not. What about the fact that Haruge Malchus, Ein Adam Yachal Lamoid b'mechitzasan? The Gemara says Haruge Malchus kivan de shaloi bedin kamiktali havilhu kapara. That if they're killed by the government, even if dina de machusa dina, but nevertheless it might not be an authorized judgment, and therefore anyone who perishes through the hands of the government has an immediate kapara. It sounds like even if they're even in avodah zarah, even if they worshipped idols. However, haruge bezdin, but those who were murdered by bezdin, those who got real halachic capital punishment, kivan de bedin kamiktali, since they're killed bedin like havilu kapara, they are not atoned. In other words, they remain in a state of rishayim. But in any event, the Gemara is saying that someone who is killed by the malchus, and since it's shaloi kadin, Ein Adam Yachal Lamoid b'mechitzasan, and Havi Lahu Kapara. So it's a very interesting shaila. And again, just want to preface, don't get sensitive about it. This is a halachic shaila. No matters in halacha are governed by anybody's personal feelings or emotions. Everything is based on the halachic principles. Question is, for those who perished during the Holocaust, or any other tragedy in Jewish history, are you allowed to say Kaddish for them? You say, what do you mean, are you allowed to say Kaddish for them? Yeah, exactly. Are you allowed to say, why not? The answer is, why do you say Kaddish for a person? Because they need a tikkun. They need a tikkun. There's something deficient. After all, nobody's perfect. So we say Kaddish, we hope they have some type of tikkun in Olam Haba. There's nothing they could do for themselves, so we try to help them out. But based on what we just learned, that Haruge Malchus, Ein Adam Yachal Lamoid b'mechitzasan, if someone is murdered, chas v'shalom, by the government, by the Rishayim, that nobody could approach them in Gan Eden, and they have a kapara, so then maybe you're not allowed to say Kaddish, because they don't need your Kaddish. They don't need it. You can't just say Kaddish. You can't say Kaddish Levatala. You can't say Kaddish for... So the same way you can't say for the living, maybe you can't say for someone who perished in the Shoah. What are you doing? They don't need your Kaddish. They've reached the ultimate level. They have achieved the pinnacle madrega that is possible for a human being to achieve. Maybe you don't say Kaddish for them. You don't need to. And if you don't need to, maybe you shouldn't. That's the question. So, well, it's a little bit of a shocking question. You would think, what could be more beautiful? What could be more of a memory than the answer? You don't say Kaddish as a memorial. Kaddish is not a plaque. Kaddish is not a statue. Kaddish is a tikkun. So somebody who perished, al Kiddush Hashem, doesn't need a tikkun, maybe you're not allowed to say Kaddish. That was the question that is addressed by contemporary poskim, but it was addressed a very long time ago by the Maharil. The Maharil was the backbone of Piskei Ashkenaz, And the Maril deals with this question in Siman Tzadites. Va'al davar hakadish liyasmi hakadoshim. Ana lo yishmi alei masha kasav mar b'shem Rabbeinu hakadosh. I didn't hear what you wrote in the name of Rabbeinu. Supposedly, the Shayal was quoting Rabbeinu, that refers to Marami Rothenberg, who maybe said something from which it implies that you do not say Kaddish for Kedoshim. Avol shamati acherim oimrim kain. I heard other people say it. V'lo hishkachati bahem. I didn't pay attention to it. Ki nirli davar pashat. Because it seems to me obvious. D'yesh la'amrai. That you should say it. V'taima didi. And my reason is, me'avelo shekasam haram dehava mitam mishpat rishayim begehenim yud beis chodesh. The reason is, there's avelos for Kedoshim, because even a wicked person serves time in Gehenim for 12 months. Because of Mahari or Zarua ben Maharach, that tzarich l'sabel al Kedoshim. Another question: if somebody perishes al Kedosh Hashem, do you sit avelos, or do you say, what do you sit avelos for? They've already accomplished whatever they need to. There's nothing, no reason to sit avelos. Beherich b'tshuvasai b'soif dvarav to ha'omer she'en lehisabel aleihem. Someone who says not to mourn for the Kedoshim tzarich kapara. They need atonement. V'chein shamati me Rabbeisai, says the Marel, I heard from my Rabbeim. Dahachi nafak uvda b'gzeros Prague. That the story happened in Prague. Sheyesh sharatzu shaloi lehisabel al Kedoshim. That some wanted to say not to mourn for the Kedoshim. V'soif hiskimu agdam b'yom ha'im l'sabel. And the Gedolim changed their mind that they should mourn. Now, what happened in Prague? What's the Maril talking about? So you look at number 4 in the Seder HaDoros of Rabbi Chil Halperin. In the year Hey Kuf Mem Tes. So now we're in the year Hey Taf Shin Ayin Zayin 777. So this happened in the year 149. So that's 628 years ago. Okay? Be'isru Chag Shal Pesach, Hey Kuf Mem Tes. What happened? Hisasvu Anoshim Reikim. Empty people gathered on Isru Chag of Pesach in the year 628 years ago. V'alu al am Hashem b'charavos v'kardumas v'argos and b'chutzos, and they murdered the Jewish people with swords and hatchets. U'bateim sarfo v'eish v'hoitziu yishenei afar mikavem. They even removed dead from the graves. Ayin slicha sheyasad marino Ravigdor Kara. Ravigdor Kara was one of the Gedolim of Prague. If you go to Prague today, his grave is intact. Hamaschelas Eis Kol Hatla. There's a special slicha composed for this. V'zeha yibimei HaKezer Wenzel Melech Bohem. V'lohaya, the king of Bohemia. V'lohaya Mar Machas Rakolish Hayosh Ve'enav Yasa. Okay, so after that episode, some Gedolim said maybe we're not Misabel. We mean Misabel. They reached the highest madriga that a person could reach. Ultimately, they decided, yes, we do sit avelos. So what's the rationale over here? Why would you say Kaddish? Again, bottom line, why should you say Kaddish? Says the Maharil, V'hi gufa nirali, it would seem to me, Afa agav shehim kedoshei al yain, even though those who perished were supreme high, supremely sanctified, U'madrego al yaina, Bein beria yechol alamai b'mechitzasam, Mikamakai, mi mafis, Diyesh avero shetzrichas misa mashuna. There are certain sins that misa alone is not mechaber. You need an unusual death. V'tzara de kivra, k'may shekasav Rav Simcha v'ken kasav Ramban. Diyesh onish kares b'zeh, v'lavay al miktsas averos. Meaning, even though Nebuch, these people died, nobody knows for sure whether the kapara is 100%. Ve'ein tzadik ba'aretz asher yasa tov v'lo yachta, and it could be that even though they're greatly sanctified and they're Kedoshim, they still might need some more kapara. D'iloi temahachi, if you don't say this. Mi sheyesh av yadua meforsam b'tar v'chasidus. Let's say someone has a father who is well known as a Talmid Chacham and a Tzadik min Urav. Atu miloi boy Kaddish. You won't say Kaddish? Why not? Misam Arekes. Question. Question. Somebody has a father who's a tzaddik yesod olam. So now what? Why would they say Kaddish for him? The guy went through a tshuva, Yom Kippur. The person died. He had kapara through his misa. Why should the son say Kaddish? Elachai shinan. We're worried. Shema ba'at b'kaparos. You don't know what's going on in anybody's heart. Maybe this big tzaddik was not makabel the Yisurim ba'ava to a full extent. Or sharch shashas. Bottom line is, nobody's perfect. And even people who perish, Kiddush Hashem, and even though we say, Ein Adam Oimed b'mechitzasam, nevertheless, it's not a bizayon to say Kaddish for them, because nobody knows what kind of tikkun people need. They get a kapara, but you never know, maybe they need more. Never know. And then he says an incredible thing that I was not aware of. V'chazinan, and we see who are the four people who never sinned. You have what? Binyamin, the father of Yaakov, the son of Yaakov. And you have Amram, the father of Moshe. And you have Yishai, the father of David, and Kilav, the son of David. So Yishai, we say, died be'etchiyah shal nachash. That he never sinned. The only reason he died is because that's the fate of mankind. And I didn't know this. I thought Yishai, so he died on his bed like Misas Nashika. No. Yishai was murdered. I said, really? Doesn't say that anywhere. Doesn't say that in the Gemara. It doesn't say that in Tanakh. You forgot the Medrash Tanchuma that Rashi quotes in Sefer Shmuel. It must have just slipped your mind. That even though the Gemara tells us in Bava Basra that Yishai died be'etchiyah shel nachash. Look at number 5. Tan Rabbanon arba mesu be'etchiyah shel nachash. Ve'elohein Binyamin ben Yaakov. Ve'amram avi Moshe. Ve'yishai avi David. Ve'kilav ben David. Ve'kulhu Gemara. They are all a tradition, Labar mi Yishai, except for Yishai, Avi David. In other words, all these people are a tradition except for Yishai. Yishai, we can actually learn from the Psukim that he died because of the snake. The Chsivias Amasa, Sam Avshalom Tachas Yoav, Al Hatzava, Amasa ben Ish, Ushma Yisra, Yisraeli, Ashaba, El Avigail, Bas Nachash. Sefrek the Gemara, v'chi bas nachashi, Avigail was the daughter of a snake. V'aloi bas Yishahi, t'chsiv ach Yosem tzruya, v'Avigail, ela bas misha meis be'etchiyah shel nachash. Moreover, Rabbi Isai, even though Yishai died, despite the fact he didn't sin, he was still murdered. Really? I didn't know that. Well, it's a good thing you came to the Koilel here in Young Israel this morning. The pasuk says in Shmuel, that Vayanchem es Pnei Melech Moav, they guided the face of the king of Moav. It means David took his family, his father and his mother, and some of his siblings, Vayeshvu Imai, and they lived with the king of Moav, Kol Yemei Hayos David B'Ametzuda, as long as David was hiding in the fortress. Says Rashi, by the way, you ever hear of Rashi? Says Rashi, Vayeshvu Imai, Rashi is related to David HaMelech. Vayeshvu imay kol yemei hayos David b'Metzuda samach l'mayav. Uchsheyatza David misham, and when David left there, liyar charas harag melech Moav es aviv es imay v'yachiv. The king of Moav killed Yishai, and by the way, who is David's mother? Very good, not Seves ben Adoel. Right? His mother, he killed his father, his mother, the Achiv and his brothers, chutz me'echad shebehem. Except for one. V'hu she'achiyeu nachash v'amoini, v'hu ha'chesed she'amar David kasher asa aviv imadi chesed, k'di isa b'medrash Rabbi Tanchuma. This is a little known medrash Tanchuma quoted by Rashi, that despite the fact that Yishai never sinned, he was murdered. What was he murdered for? The answer is, even big tzaddikim, nobody knows what kind of tikkun people need. I guess that's what he's trying to prove. So everybody needs a tikkun, and it's not really possible to know and to say, yeah, they don't need Kaddish. Yes, they suffered at Kiddush Hashem. Yes, in Adam Yachalam b'mechitzasan. Yes, they have a kapara. Aber Kaddish, maybe they still need. So, that's what the Maril said many hundreds of years ago. But this question was raised again after the Holocaust. And the Minchas Yitzchak says a very interesting svara. And that's the focus of today's share. The Shas Tshuvas Minchas Yitzchak, Siman Pei Gimel. Hinei im Bechlal, im Mechuyev lahachzik hayartzeit, aloisem shenevdu b'shas hagzerois. Does one keep a yahrzeit of people who perished during the Shoah? Again, maybe not. What are you keeping a yahrzeit for? To do what? To say Kaddish? For what? Thank you very much. They don't need your Kaddish. You sitting home bringing your schnapps and sponge cake, they did more than your little Kaddish in shul, and the air-conditioned shul. Them in the crematoria, they're Kedoshim Shamayim, they don't need your Kaddish. Or do they? So the Minchas Yitzchak says, Haya Evshaladan Mehadim Avuar, there's a tshuva in the Shvus Yaakov that if a person's father was a tzaddik, Shvus Yaakov says, don't have to say Kaddish. But nobody's a tzaddik gamor. But if they were a tzaddik gamor, maybe they wouldn't need Kaddish. And since based on the Gemara in Sanhedrin, Haruge Malchus, Kivan de Shaloi Kedin Mektili, Havilhu Kapara, Miyad Terem Sari de Kivri. The Gemara is mashma that Haruge Malchus have kapara even before the tzara of the kever, and the Chassam Sofer brings a raya from that Gemara as well. It comes out Havilu kapara vein sarach lekadish. It comes out that even somebody who Nebuch perished in the Holocaust, even if they were a Rasha Gamor, they get immediate kapara and they don't need Kaddish. But nevertheless, says the Minchas Yitzchak, V'yoysim mizah kasav b'sefer masgaras hazav al kitzer b'shem hagoyin hakadosh Rav Nosson Adler hakoyin. De ben mi shenerag doicha leben mi shemes. Yeah, it's interesting. It used to be in the olden days that only one person said Kaddish, and he was moitzi everybody else who had to. So let's say you have two children, Nebuch. One of them's parent passed away naturally, and the other one's parent was killed al Kiddush Hashem. Rav Nosson Adler says the one who was killed, the one whose parent was Nerag, has Kedima, which is mashma, the opposite of what we're saying. That someone who was Nerag is what? Needs more kapara. But that's against Shas. But says the Minchas Yitzchak a very interesting svara. That mikamakam nira the yesh leimer Kaddish. Why? Uviyoyser mash nagel habanim hachzakas hayartzeit. Mishum dereya mazla ba'oisa shah. That if somebody was killed, Nebuch al Kiddush Hashem, even though they have tremendous zechusim, and even though in Adam oimed b'mechitzasan, but nevertheless, it was obviously Reya Mazlei. They didn't have good mazel if this is what happened. And because of that sort of chisaron, they need some kind of hashlama through the Kaddish. Again, what's the svara that he's saying? That someone who is nerag al Kiddush Hashem, Reya Mazlei. Reya Mazlei. They had bad mazel. So even though we say Ein Mazel Yisrael, Tosfos says in my Katan, that just means, really Tosfos says Yesh Mazel Yisrael. Ein Mazel Yisrael means that Al Yidei Zuchus Gadol, they could break it. But there is a concept of mazel. By the way, the Chassam Sofer in a tshuva in Siman Shin Lamed Gimel brings a raya from the Shakla V'Taya, the Gemara in Sanhedrin, where the Gemara contrasts somebody who was killed in the Ir Hanidachas to somebody who died al yidei the Malchus. He says the story happened like this: Ish Kadosh Hanerag, a holy man that was killed through the Goyim, and he was buried. Then the next day, his name is Reb David Shacharlus, and they asked me whether they should bury him b'kivrei avosav, or should he be buried alone? Because there's a concept that the din arba misa is loy batlu, and just like someone who is mechuyev misa from Bezdin, you do not bury him in the ancestral grave. Maybe someone who died and was killed by the guy, and we also don't bury them there. And the Chassam Sofer says, no, just the opposite. That if you look in the Shakla V'Tarya, in the Gemara in Sanhedrin, the Gemara says we're not makriv of the animals of the Anshe Ir Hanidachas, because the Gemara asks why not. If they were killed, they have kapara. So the Gemara says no. Meis bidei akum, where they were killed improperly, they have immediate kapara, even if they died as risham. Meis bebezdin, they don't have a kapara until nisakal habasar, and then you gather the bones and you bring them to kivrei avaisav. Says the Chassam Sofer, you learn from this Gemara two things. Number one, that that if somebody gained kapara before the decomposition, they would bury them immediately b'kivrei avaisav. Elamai, someone who's narag bidei bezdin, does not have immediate kapara. And number two, you see from here that someone who's narag bidei akum, niskaper lo miyad, terem tzara de kivra. In any event, says the Chassam Sofer, this individual who was killed, we say that he has immediate kapara, and you could bury him b'kivrei avaisav. But tzara de kivra is a decomposition. So someone who's narag bidei bezdin needs the tzara de kivra. Someone who's narag bidei goyim does not need tzara de kivra. Let's talk about this svara that the Minchas Yitzchak said, that someone who perished in the Shoah had Reya Mazlei. And because of that svara, he says to say Kaddish because they had Reya Mazlei. So I found the tshuva, it's quoted in many svarim, Shas tshuva She'elas Yitzchak, from Rav Yitzchak Olbaum, Zechatzak Levracha, who's Rav Noach Isaac's father. So he wrote tshuvas when he was a rabbi in Toronto. So he has a famous tshuva about a different topic, but it's relevant to this as well. So he was asked about this question: should you say Kaddish for the Kedoshim? And he brings the tshuva of the Minchas Yitzchak, who says maybe to say Kaddish because these people, they had Reya Mazlei. And Rabbi Olbaum, Rav Yitzchak Olbaum, he rejects the svara of the Minchas Yitzchak. Well, how's that? Take a look at the end of number 10. He says, V'gam yeshloimar, debenidon didon, shenergu al kedushas Hashem, kol asher b'shem Yisrael yichuna, yeshloimar shegam harama moideh shemasablim aleim. It's interesting, there's a Ramah. The Ramah paskins that a mumar who is killed by goyim, you're not misabel. So the question is, why not? Since the Gemara says that someone who's killed bidei goyim has immediate kapara, so even if they would have died naturally, you wouldn't sit shiva. But now that they were murdered, but the Ramah paskins that you do not sit shiva on someone who's a mumar who was killed. However, the Stimas HaPoskim is mashma, you would. But nevertheless, the Tshuva writes, V'gam yeshom de b'nidan didan, shenergu al kedushas Hashem, kol asher b'shem Yisrael yichuna. Here, the Jews who perished in the Shoah were not just murdered. They were murdered al Kiddush Hashem. The reason they were murdered is they were murdered because they were Jews. Yesh Lamer, even the Ramah would agree that you're Misabel. Vim Kain, maybe you don't say Kaddish. So the Minchas Yitzchak says you say Kaddish because Reya Mazlei. So Rabbi Olbaum says, no, you would not consider those who perished in the Shoah to be Reya Mazlei. Why not? Why? Because the Gemara is talking about ish echad, or a few people. So you could say one person or a group of people. You could say Reya Mazla, they had bad mazel that day. If it was nafal goyrolam lehargam. Aval hacha shenergu milyonim me'achenu b'nei Yisrael rachman al-atzan. Here, where you had 6 million Jews died, you can't say 6 million Jews were unlucky. One person could be unlucky. Few people could be unlucky. Many people, but not Klal Yisrael. Elamai, there was a gzeira that we don't understand. But you wouldn't call that Reya Mazlam. And therefore, it's not a svara to say Kaddish for them because they are Reya Mazlam. It wasn't Reya Mazlam. And therefore, Rabbi Olbaum says, maybe you shouldn't say. Like the Zayar says, but Lamaisa, the Poskim already say, the Maril already says, you say Kaddish, so you say Kaddish. But it is something which is a little bit difficult to understand why you would.
Shoah, you had call on Yisrael. You're going to say the same principle, but not saying Kaddish for kapara for 1 or 2 or 3.
They had their kapara, so why are you saying Kaddish? For what? What do they need? They need your Kaddish?
No, it's Xera.
So what are you saying? The purpose of Kaddish is to be mechaper. So you don't need it.
Such on a large scale?
Certainly, yeah. So why do I bring this in? That's what they say, but the Maisa the Poskim say the reason for Kaddish is a kapara, not an aliyah. That's not the reason. You know, that's a colloquial expression, but is that really the reason they say Kaddish? That's not what the Poskim say. The reason for Kaddish is the neshama needs a tikkun or a kapara. So you say the Kaddish is to elevate them. Here's a shaila. Could a person name, is it a good idea to name a child after a relative who perished during the Shoah? So what's the shaila? So normally, we don't name after somebody who was murdered or killed young. Why? Because we say they didn't have good mazel, so you don't want the kid. So this is relevant to this question. In other words, should a person, is a good idea to name a child after someone who perished in the Shoah? Do we say if they perished, it was Reya Mazle? Or, like Rabbi Obam said, that the Reya Mazle does not apply to, it applies to one person, many people, it doesn't apply on a large scale. So if you look at number 11, Be'inyan imlitain shemois achar ha'anoshim ha'yolodim shumso al Kiddush Hashem al yidei ha'germanim yimach shemam lanetzach hine kvar he'erosi b'tshuva b'makim achar dahad b'chol inyan einois in shemois achar yolodim ha'anoshim tzirim. The reason you don't name after children or young people, mishum kivan shemeisa b'mei alumam, if they died in their youth, who aid v'raya shemazal amra, it's a proof that they had bad mazel. Shebazeh shekar in shem, because we know when we call a name, hu goyreim upayel harbe loisayish, it has an effect on a person. Amnam kain kol zeh kishamesa b'der chateva. That's only if somebody died naturally. Something as widespread as the Holocaust. It's obvious that you don't say it was their mazel. It had nothing to do with the person. There's no chshash likra b'shema shalhem, to use their name. There's no problem to use their name. It's better that their name should have a everlasting memorial. That b'cholzeh, nevertheless, ha'alesi, I concluded, shemiyois toiv. It's not required, but it's a good idea. Likra b'shnei shemos. Add a name. V'yesh b'zeh kama ta'amim. And there are a number of reasons. So in other words, he does not find any halachic problem with naming after someone who perished. Reya Mazle. You don't say Reya Mazle, like he said. The same reason, it's not a svara not to say Kaddish for them because of Reya Mazle. It's also not a svara not to name after them, but he says it's a good idea to add a name. By the way, he brings over here that the Yam Shel Shlomo says that when you write the name Yeshaya, you should write it Yeshaya, but not Yeshayahu. Why? Because Yeshayahu was killed young, and he was killed by his own son. Even though we find in the Sifrei Malachim, Yeshayahu, he says, L'chod v'lo Yeshayahu hagavnu matzinu kasav b'Sifrei Malachim Yeshayahu ve'eno Yeshayahu Hanavi. That wasn't Yeshayahu Hanavi. Ki mistama lo yikara achrav. They probably wouldn't have named them after him. So since the name Yeshayahu is only by the Navi, so we don't use that name. It's used in Tanakh, it's not after the same person. Okay, so that's the idea, that's the concept, that those who perished in the Shoah, we do not say Reya Mazle. And again, he enunciates this in Chelak Beis, Siman Kuf Sadi Daled. Hinei Nisoirarti, Mekvoid Yidin Nafshi, V'chavivi, Agan Sang, Yitzuk Isaac Eichenstein. He was Ezra's Rav in Kivishad. Av Bezdin Kal Kodesh Kivishad. What? Kiviyasht. And now he's a dayan in the year Kashitze, should you name children after those who perished al Kiddush Hashem? He says, even a child who is murdered, there's no problem to use their name. And to add another name, so that a person is not afraid, and ein libay noikvai. And another reason not to use the name specifically and only is that the mention of the name could cause tsar, and that's not always a good idea. I found in the Sefer called Oitzer Plois HaTorah on Parshas Emor that the author says that he visited Rabbi Cheskel Rod in Shvat Tavshinayin Vav, and I asked him, Lamaisa, should one say Kaddish on the yard side of his parents that were Nerag al Kiddush Hashem? And he responded, yes, you should say Kaddish, and that is the conclusion of the Ramah. And it's always a benefit for the Niftar and for their children. Actually, if you look at number 14, the Darkei Moshe, the Ramah quotes the Maril, the Yesh Oimrim, some say the Ein Loimar Kaddish al Kedoshim Shenar Kedoshim, the Lesa Ela Yesh Loimar Aleim. And my grandpa, when he was in Auschwitz, he remembers that the first thing they did was they carried out the old people and they took them to crematoria, and they were crying, who's going to say Kaddish for us, who's going to say Kaddish for us? And he was makabel on himself to say Kaddish for the Kedoshim, which he's been doing every single day for the last 72 years. So, yeah. Okay. Okay, so the truth is that was the second part of the tshuva of the Minchas Yitzchak. If you look in the back in number, so Rebbe Ezra wants to know, what if you don't know what the yard site is? And in number 8, it's the second part of the Minchas Yitzchak, as well as the second part of the tshuva of Rabbi Oben, but I didn't put it either on the page, because that wasn't what we were talking about, so it's another Inyan that I don't have the answer to. Okay, so... By some, yeah. Okay, so he also mentions that he asked Rabbi Cheskel Roth that some people are afraid to give a name after someone who was killed at Kiddush Hashem, and they add a name. So Rabbi Cheskel Roth's opinion is that not only could you name after someone who perished in the Holocaust, even if they died young, it is not even necessary to add a name. So lahalacha, many poskim say that that type of situation was not Rei Amazle, but it was a Gzeira, Nistere, Darkei Hashem, and should be Zoicha, the Klal Yisrael should only have Suras Tovos, Simchas, and Nachas. Again, Shabbos.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.